Hey guys, how is it going? In this video I will go over 2 builds you can use in solo dungeons. In my previous video I already covered the budget Great Axe build, which aside from being cheap is very fast in clearing solo dungeons as well. Nonetheless, you guys made clear you want more solo dungeon builds, and who am I to disappoint you? I do want to throw out the disclaimer that I'm not a solo dungeon builds guru, and the builds I share are simply examples based on my experience. If you would like to see your solo dungeon build covered in one of my next videos, make sure to share it in the comments below. And if you like the content I make sure to like, subscribe and turn on notifications. You can also join the Levi Discord server, and if you do, make sure to drop a wave so I have someone to wave back at in these quarantine times. Let's move on to the builds. The first build features the Carving Sword together with the Stalker Hood, a Stalker Jacket and Demon Boots. For the cape I'm using Undead. As for my personal choice of food and potion for PvP encounters, I have Amulet and Healing. And of course we have health regen food and a stack of potion pots. This is my current favorite build for solo dungeons. It's fast in clearing, it feels fun to play, has PvP potential and you can take a couple hits without any worries. In this build your damage comes from your helmet, jacket and weapon, which opens room for an undead cape since you don't need the extra damage one of the offensive capes provide, such as the Thetford cape. Because of that, this is also a relatively safe build. The undead cape combined with demon boots and healing potion make for great escape and survivability potential. You have one gap closer, which is your E skill, and one immunity skill, which is your W. In general, you shouldn't have any energy issues with this build. Now for the skill breakdown. Starting with the Carving Sword, the Q skill Heroic Cleave does damage to all mobs around you and provides heroic charges. Heroic charges stack up to 3 times, and each stack increases your move and attack speed by 12% for a total of 36%. You basically want to use your Q skill continuously and keep the stacks up as much as possible, even when moving from pack to pack. If you encounter difficult bosses, you can swap to Heroic Strike for slightly more single target damage on your Q. On your W, you want to have Parry Strike. The Parry Strike makes you immune for a short duration, and whilst channeling, you reflect all incoming damage. On top of that, it also does AoE damage at the end of the channel. Since Parry Strike unlocks at level 70, simply use any of the other W skills until then. As for your E, you have Fearless Strike, which is a dash that does damage to all monsters hit, and reduces their resistances based on the amount of heroic charges you have active. Try to always have 3 stacks of heroic charges active when using this skill on bosses. As for mobs, you might find yourself sometimes using it as a gap closer. I personally use the Deep Cuts passive on the Carving Sword for a slight DPS boost. I suggest you use the Stalker Hood as often as possible. It has a relatively low cooldown and provides a 20% increase in damage for 4 seconds. If the mobs around you are also below 50% health, when you use the Mortal Agony skill, their resistances also get reduced. Mortal Agony also reveals invisible enemies within the same radius, which is a radius of 6 meters, which might be useful if you are to get dived by enemies with items such as the Assassin's Jacket. I like cooldown reduction, and for that I use the Quick Tinker passive on the Hood. I feel like all 3 passives on the Hood are viable, and it comes down to personal preference. The Electric Field on the Stalker Jacket has the longest cooldown in this build. Nonetheless, don't be greedy with using it. It's a huge source of your DPS. It's an electric field that surrounds you for 8 seconds and does damage twice per second to all mobs around you. Just like the Hood, I also have the Quick Tinker passive on the jacket for cooldown reduction. As for the Vengeful Sprint on the Demon Boots, I barely use this skill. I kind of save it as my oh snap button if I am to get dived. The lower your HP is when you use the Vengeful Sprint, the more you get out of it. Ideally, you want to use it as your Undead Cape procs, so you can benefit fully from the 6-second sprint to get yourself to safety. However, this doesn't mean you shouldn't use the Vengeful Sprint at all. It's totally fine to use it during boss fights which are otherwise difficult, and it's also fine to use it whilst clearing packs to speed things up. Just don't forget to start praying the moment you use it to not be found by any dungeon divers, as it does have about 30 seconds cooldown. The passive I use is Toughness on the boots, as I won't benefit from the other passives in solo dungeons. To change things up about this build, the first thing you could do is simply use a different sword. Any of the swords will do. What makes all the swords great are the Q and W, which make for a lot of AoE damage and utility. You can replace the Stalker Hood and Stalker Jacket by the Hellion Hood and the Hellion Jacket. This is a much more expensive alternative, but will benefit you immensely during PvP encounters. It will however take away from the clearing speed a little. The budget PvP variant would be to go with either Cleric Robe or Assassin's Jacket, with the Guardian Helmet and Scholar Sandals. However, as you can imagine, this will take away from the clearing speed even more. The second build features the regular bow together with the Guardian Helmet, Cleric Robe and Scholar Sandals. With this build I used the Thetford Cape. My personal choice of food and potion for PvP encounters is the Stew and Gigantify. And once again we of course have health regen food and a stack of potion pots. I used to have 400 specs in bow, but at some point I decided to respec into something else. Big mistake, I can tell you. However, that is a story for a different time. Playing bow once again, after not having played it for a year, I instantly noticed this requires some practice. Obviously, you have the benefit of being ranged, but this means little if you don't use that range. Compared to the first build, you are far more squishy and it's very punishing to get hit. Luckily, the Cleric Robe and Guardian Helmet are part of this build and give some room for error. The playstyle of the bow is very different to that of swords, but a lot of fun as well. It's pretty fast in clearing packs and very fast at killing bosses. In this build, the damage purely comes from your weapon and cape, where your armor pieces make for a lot of PvP potential. If you play this build right, you won't have to use your armor skills during PvE and you can fully save them for PvP. Your only escape is your boots, where your helmet and robe make for sustain and survivability. At first I used the energetic passive on the bow because I thought I would have energy issues, but after testing some more, I can tell you that even without the energetic passive, you shouldn't have any energy issues at all with this build. One big advantage of this build is that it's cheap, since it doesn't use any artifact equipment, and the cape is one of the cheaper ones as well. Now for the skill breakdown. Starting with the bow, you want to have Deadly Shot on your Q. The Deadly Shot shoots an arrow in a straight line and does damage to all monsters hit. It also decreases resistances, which stack up to 3 times. On your W, you want to have Ray of Light, which is an AoE that does damage to all monsters hit and also roots them in place. The more you use Ray of Light, the faster your dungeon runs will be. I found myself prioritizing Deadly Shot over Ray of Light at first, and the moment I realized I had to switch things up, I started clearing dungeons faster. Ray of Light unlocks at level 70. Until then you can use explosive arrows on your W, which is a good alternative that will cover the AoE damage Ray of Light provides. On your E you have the Enchanted Quiver skill, which is a buff that gives you a bunch of enchanted arrows that increase your normal attack damage and attack speed. The buff stacks up to 6 times and at max stacks, it also reduces the enemy's resistances. This skill is what makes this build very fast at killing bosses, but that doesn't mean you should only use it then. Just like any other skill, use it as often as you see fit. Of course you won't use it on the smaller mobs with a couple hundred HP, but when you have a pack of bigger mobs, the skill really helps speed things up. As for the passive on the bow, I personally like to use piercing arrows after finding out this build doesn't have any energy issues. At first I was thinking of the attack speed passive, but I figured with the steroid on the E, you will most likely reach the cap for attack speed already. As I said before, if you play this build right, you won't have to use any of your armor skills unless for PvP. Nonetheless, your Guardian Helmet does heal you for a little, so if you find yourself in an oh-snap situation, just use it for that purpose. The emergency heal skill also removes all damage over time effects, which is amazing to have if you are to get ganked by something such as a Cursed Staff user. The passive I use on the helmet is Toughness for some damage reduction. On the Cleric Robe we have the Everlasting Spirit skill, which gives you a shield if you take any damage within the next 1.5 seconds after activating it. Whilst the shield is active, you don't take any damage and your own damage and heal output get increased by 30% for 3 seconds. So if you are to use emergency heal from your Guardian Helmet during the shield, it would heal for even more. The Everlasting Spirit skill does have a high cooldown, so try to avoid using it during PvE. For the passive on the Cleric Robe, I take Aggression as it increases my damage and I don't need or benefit from the other 2 passives. Moving on to the boots, we have the Focused Run on our Scholar Sandals. I personally use it throughout my run from pack to pack to speed things up. If I really have to dodge something, I also use it not to get hit. However, since you can't attack whilst using the Focused Run, this gives me a weird feeling whenever I do so. The Focused Run is a channel skill, so if you want to use it just to dodge something, just use the skill once again to deactivate it after. The Focused Run also generates energy, which is often overlooked. If you have energy issues with this build, simply use the Focused Run in between packs to get energy as well. For the passive, we once again take Aggression for the increase in damage. And to change things up about this build, you can start by using a different bow. The Bow of Baden is a very good option since it provides an additional AoE with a lot of damage. However, it is far more expensive than the regular bow. To benefit even more from the Bow of Baden, you can replace the Guardian Helmet by the Assassin Hood to use the E skill more often. I would recommend changing your cape to Demon if you want to melt stuff away, since Demon cape does lava and lava melts stuff. or Undead Cape for the escape potential. Although these changes will speed things up, it is far more expensive, and if you change the helmet, it removes your sustainability skill for PvP encounters. There is nothing wrong with just replacing the regular bow for the Bow of Baden alone in this build. If you want more AoE on a budget, you could go for the longbow. If you want a more PvP oriented solo dungeon bow, you can also go for the war bow, although the regular bow is pretty good for PvP as well. Once you are comfortable with this build, you can swap out the cleric robe for a mage robe, which will increase your damage by 5%, making for faster clears. And now for some final notes. Keep in mind that a lot of the information I share is based on personal preference and experience. You can easily swap out equipment pieces, capes, foods or potions, use different skills or passives for a completely different experience. Find out what you prefer and what works best for you by testing things out. A big thanks for all the comments suggesting builds in my previous video, and to everyone who suggested builds on the Levi Discord server. I will do my best to get to all of them in a timely manner. If you enjoyed watching this video and would like to see your build featured, make sure to share it in the comments below. If you have any feedback for how the information in this video is put together, please share it as well, so I can do a better job at it in the next video. As always, I wish you good luck in your adventures, and maybe I'll see you soon.